Hello, my name is Fenn. I'm from Laney Amplification. Today is Digbeth launch day. And today, despite it being a momentous occasion because we have, of course, launched the beautiful Digbeth and range of pedals, etc., we're going to be speaking to one of the UK's top bass players, a guy who plays in one of the sickest bands, and a man who has also had the pleasure of playing an actual live festival in the past week. His name's Dan Pugsy. The band is Skin Dread. He is a Laney artist. He's the Digbeth endorsee, and here he is. Bring him in.
Hey mate, how
Dan
are
Pugsy.
you?
Yeah, I'm all right. How are you?
Yeah, good. Big day, right?
Big day, good day. So far, so good. I think. Well, hopefully, anyway, we'll see the reaction as it comes through. But so far, so good. Everybody liking it. So, yeah, Dan. First of all, I guess it's the best way to sort of start this is to go, what, when, and where, and how did you first hear about this new bass range? Because you're Laney endorsee already.
Yeah, yeah. So obviously, like I was using the Laney stuff through the original Nexus to the SL to the SLS, and I heard from you a while ago this idea about making this head, you know,
Yeah.
and I was just like all in as soon as I heard because there's a few things in that, but I always felt like the Laney stuff had so much kind of like bandwidth, you know, so much like so much clarity, but then to have some kind of like saturation or something to for not just rock music, for applications across the board, musical applications, I just thought was such a biggie, and I always had to put something in the front end of my amp to do that. Um, and then you started telling me about the development of this basically, and I saw over the last year or two I've sort of seen it at different stages, how to go with it at different stages, and yeah, I mean, I think you guys should be really stoked with the final result.
Well, yeah, well, the thing is, so I was speaking to Aaron McKenzie from Whilst She Sleeps earlier on, and I was saying to him how, so I've been trying to get him on Laney for some time, and then my sort of, my balance of players were between three artists. So it was Aaron McKenzie from Whilst She Sleeps because I wanted to bring him on board as somebody who'd never played Laney before. It was you because you have played Laney for what 8, 9 years, and you
Mm-hmm.
know the development of the amps, and you play on stage loud rock music. But then Charlie Fowler from Mahalia too, because he's
Yeah,
session player, does lots of smaller things. He will be getting different tones because he does like hip hop and stuff like that as well. So when I brought it to you, it was like the first test because we're mates as well. It was like the first proper test of what is this like? Tell me if there's anything wrong with it, what needs changing, blah blah blah. And I think the first thing that you might have tried, like I'm trying to wrap my brain now, was the sort of like we just sort of had a test chassis with sort of like the bones of this amp in, and then it wasn't really. I hadn't even really thought about how the actual look of it was going to turn out because in my head it was how I was hoping it was going to be this, but
yeah.
actually then it arrived like at R&D samples and stuff, and it was like even better than I could have imagined how it looked. And showing it you were like the same.
Because you when it when you got the initial chassis, because I think didn't you bring a 4x10 and the 500-watt head to Bristol initially,
Yeah.
and remember we had it in my
It was the
flat.
2x12. It was the two by
Two by
twelve.
12, yeah, the 2x12, and we were just both sort of looking at it. I've got pictures of you in my flat with it, like, and just like overjoyed with it because it's,
Yeah.
you know, like the Laney stuff. Um, I wanted, an amp that really looked like a classic amp. That's not just that look kind of like studio equipment or something like that. This is really, I think, for you guys, part of your heritage of like, it's a British family-run, family-owned amplification company, and you've got the heritage, you've got the names, and it's just like, well, this is kind of like evangelical for that. This is like the culmination, like the name, the thought process of the name. I don't know if you spoke about that with Aaron or publicly, but the name of the series, like everything in the series, there's just been so much thought put into it. And in terms of application and features, it's got features that I really liked from the old stuff. Specifically, I always talk about the tilt thing, know. I'll go into that if you want. I mean,
please do. So, in fact, if you explain, I'll talk about like the naming of it and stuff in a bit. But like, if you talk about, if you just tell us like what are the features on this, like that were taken from, so like tilt was taken from Nexus, but what are the specifics and the nuances on this that really sort of stand out for you?
Well, yeah, taking the tilt from the Nexus and the SLSs. So for me, like I'll roll up into different venues, and sometimes I'll be playing like hard stages, sometimes big hollow festival stages, and really it's not practical in changeover to spend a lot of time tweaking your tone. So I kind of like know what. Am I shouting? I'm excited. Am I shouting?
No, it's good.
Okay, right. So I roll up, and if it's really boomy or something, it's not going to work. If it's too tight, it's not going to work. And with the tilt thing, you can kind of take the EQ and kind of accentuate one end and kind of bring the other one down, and kind of like it almost pivots what's happening. And it's just such a practical thing for people that have to play a lot of shows in a lot of different scenarios. So because I have to then do very little to my actual amp to make it sort of sound how I want it to sound, because for touring guys, it's like in the studio a lot of the time you're going to be experimenting with tones and stuff, but you want consistency, and sometimes that on different stages you're not going to get that, and that's really a tool to like try and get an element of consistency, but at the same time tailoring it for your environment. So that's great. Kind of the mid notch thing that's kind of happening.
Because that's different. Because what we used to do, we used to have a mid knob and then a full range control from I think it went from 5 to 5K. And again, unless you know the exact position where you want it, because mids are so important and they can change in the slightest little potential. So
this looks like, what is it, like 750, 500? You'd probably be able to tell me what the figures are, but like where like around 200, around that kind of thing. It's just really musical frequencies for bass, depending on what you're doing.
Well, it's really sort of the areas where looking at a lot of different playing styles, not particularly players per se, but playing styles, and you've gone, well, where do people dial in for sort of like more of a funk tone if you're going to play with your fingers or a bit of a slap or something? Or where are you going to play if you're playing with a pick, low down, loud rock music? And it's like they're really like not obscure, but they're made for different sort of styles, really, but more not genres, but styles of playing. Because really, when you hone it down, there aren't that many different styles of playing, really. Like when you've got your instrument in your hand and you're either playing with fingers, pick, hard, or soft. Like it's being very generic.
But it's how it sits with the other instruments, and it's like kind of creating like almost like an audible note value, like actually hearing the notes and stuff. Like the mid range is so important for that, and having a bit of an ability to like sculpt that, but in the sense like in very bass centric areas,
playing.
So, and the whole thing with the tube drive. I mean, that's what I was talking about before. I was using different pedals in front of the amp to try and achieve that. And now I've got a choice, because maybe I want to put some distortion into the amp, but then maybe I want an overall like slightly saturated sound, you know, to like carve off certain frequencies to make it more audible, more pleasing. So yeah, it's great. I mean, and it's still got, if I turn it off, it's still got all the features like on the back, the stuff with like the auxiliary and the phones. I mean, the fact that you can it doesn't have to be on a cab to use it.
No. Well, yeah. Well, like this one that I've got set up here is we've got it running. Like, yeah, it's not loaded because it doesn't need to be. But it's like, yeah, like that's like, yeah, running now live. But that's another thing as well. See how the light is flashing?
Yeah.
And it's just, but it's glowing. Like,
well, did you speak to my guitar tech at Downloads?
Yes.
Because Matt was like, so we kind of we had to sort of pull our resources for this download thing. Because it was such a surprise, and like our usual guys were doing different stuff, they're all in different situations, and we had to get our tech Matt Tagg, who's usually, he works, his main gig now is the 1975. He was just like, I'll do it. So we were like, great, hadn't seen Matt in a while, came out, and he was like, he came in and he was like, what is that, when he saw the amp? And he saw the light and blinking, and he was just like, looked at it for a while, and then he was like, oh, that's such a good idea.
Yeah.
Such a good idea. Because
it's the idiot check, isn't it? It's like the amount of times. So if I'm showing a product to somebody, or if you're stood on a stage, and the amount of times that you just don't that lighting, it's flashing, like pulsating at you, like, oh, okay, it's all good, it's okay.
Yeah, I think you ran into some technical difficulties there, mate, with your mic. I just heard some crack-a-lack-a-lacking.
No, it's my mic.
It's because you're getting too excited.
It's because I'm getting so excited because this bass range, yeah, it's been like 2 years back and forth, like basically marketing at Lane, the marketing department at Laney, going to R&D and back and forth, and they come up with a bit of an idea, and we'll come up with a bit of an idea, and they'll go, well, that's not possible, and then we'll go, make it possible, and they'll go, oh, it might be possible, and we'll go, is it possible? Do you know what I mean? It's like one of these back and forth. But yeah, it's just crazy. Like Aaron said it quite well, actually. It's like album launch day, and I've never thought about that before. But yeah, I guess it kind of is. Like, and obviously when you hopefully, there's a new Skin Dread record coming on the horizon, and like you think of actually the launch up to that, like from concept to writing to recording to rehearsing to launch, it's such a long process. And I guess this is kind of our it's our baby in the world now, it's our child, but it's actually, well, you're free and away. Off you go.
The culmination of like a lot of work leading to this point.
But again, man, like I think so initially came down to your place, and I brought the 500 head and the 212, and again, for us doing two 12-inch speakers, because 12-inch speakers sound so good on bass, but you don't really get to see many 12-inch bass cabs, just because of, I think it's more for traditionalism's sake, because 12s sound great on bass and 10s sound great on guitar. And if you look at like guitar amp wise, if you look at producers that use 10-inch combos in studios, they swear by them. And I think it's the same way around now with bass as well. Like, people are understanding, like, naturally on the stage you need one of them, like you want a big boy, but when you're recording in the studio or something, you want something that's getting you your sort of dynamics across a little differently.
Yeah, it's about kind of like having a palette for sound, isn't it? And you might, like when you're sort of sculpting a sound, because it has to sound, it's one thing. And I think there has been a certain movement in music where people are so into their gear now and they go, right, this sounds amazing. And they're right, it sounds amazing in isolation.
Mm.
But once you introduce other instruments into it, you've got to be like, okay, well, maybe, we've got to carve out some things here to like make it work. And
Well,
that,
this is the mad thing, really, about this whole launch thing, because we obviously have known about this amp for quite a while now, but especially the last year and a half, because of the pandemic and the global situation, it was like, well, we're going to launch this amplifier and we're going to have zero live footage. So let's just launch it as like an intimate thing, artists being sort of
yeah.
talking about it, etc., like we are now.
Yeah, because I came down because of that, didn't I?
Yeah.
Came up rather, and did a bunch of filming and had a bit of a chat, and we were just like, well, this is going to be the promo for it. You've got a few players coming in, and then when the download thing happens,
oh god,
you
that phone call.
You were the first person I called because you were like, I remember like saying goodbye to you outside of my studio, and you were like, well, because you're not doing any shows for a while, well, I'll get you the 8x10 like when you need it. And I was like, cool, no hurry, no hurry. I can play with the head, with the 410, like all of that. And then maybe a week or two later, I got a call and it was like, all right, guess what's happening? Well, I couldn't say this as well. I was like, it might happen, it might not.
Yeah.
And you were like, I've got to get some in the country, right?
Yeah, literally, we need to build some and we need to get some in the country. And but again, like, everything happens for a reason, and it all came together. And I think, like, so I had one in the country, so I delivered it to you. But the second one arrived between you leaving your rehearsal space and me going to download. So it was like, right, I will bring it on the day of the show. Yeah. And like, if in normal circumstances, you would never do that because it's so like, oh well, we'll just use the one, but because it's the first gig in 2 years nearly for you boys, isn't it?
Yeah, long time. And we were, I mean, I had so many comments from people because I wanted to be like talking about the amp a lot and all that, and I didn't know what I could say or whatever. And everybody was just like, "What is that?" Like people on the stage, other bands were like looking at the rig, going, "What is this? What is this? It looks so gnarly,"
Yeah. Well, yeah. Like I can't mention a couple of them, but being with you like backstage and stuff, and a couple of different people would be like, what's that he's playing? I'm like, well, here you go, take a card. Do you know what I mean? It's like, please get in touch. But again, like that as a reaction from its first outing, absolutely phenomenal, really. But what I wanted to touch on, so your last gig, was it the Roundhouse show with Badly Drum Boy?
Yeah.
Right, so 19th of January 2020 then. Managed to squeeze some in.
Yeah.
So what was it? I'm sure you've been asked this a billion times anyway, but what was it like getting back together with the lads? What was it like getting in the rehearsal space? What was it like walking out on the stage again in front of 10,000 people?
I mean, so yeah, as you said, like my last show wasn't even a Skindred show. It was the Badly Drawn Boy little run culminating in the Roundhouse. And so I think I'm trying to remember when we last played. I mean, it was the end of 2019. We'd done a little bit of writing and stuff pre the pandemic, and then the pandy, and then and then me and a couple of mates went to America as it was all kicking off, thinking it'll all blow over. And then
you were in like a canyon or something.
Yeah, we were we got an RV and we were like driving around like Utah and Nevada, Arizona. So did like hiking and stuff. It was really cool. And then stuff started shutting. So I came home, the guys came home, and then it was like, well, we don't know what's happening. And we've been writing a bit. There were some tunes in the works, and then it just ended up that we ended up doing a lot of writing during that time. But then it was a whole thing about having to like get on stage again and play, and so it was really nerve wracking. It was really like a nerve wracking thing. Like I've not felt nervous about playing since, well, for years and years, you know. So I guess in some ways it kind of gives you a bit of an edge, but it was pretty intense. So yeah, we a, a week before it got announced, uh, we were like, okay, we agreed to it, and then we were like, what are we going to do? So we ended up rehearsing in Brighton for a week, and so I rocked up with this riff, you know, which is the 410 in the head, and then you actually came and dropped off one of the 810s to me, like on the Tuesday thing, because we had like a week in place. And actually, when I set it up, like every single person, because we hadn't seen each other in ages, and like I essentially, in some ways, I mean, I was playing like all new gear to those guys because I'd only ever played this bass for Badly Drawn Boy, and I had the other one, the black one, and this stuff, and everyone was like, "What is that?" And they were like, "It looks amazing." I was like, "Yeah, it's really great." And so I'd set up initially with this, and then when you came with the big boy, it was just like, what? You know, it was just, and everybody was like, it sounds great. And when you heard the context of playing in a room with everybody, and
see, that for me is so. The only time I've heard the Digbeth before last week at your rehearsals was either testing it in with my own band. So I'm playing bass in my own band just to try and just thrash the amp, road test it. Like this is like a year or so ago. Like just trying to break the amplifier so that we can fix it so that when it gets launched today, it's all fine. And then the only other time would be somebody coming up. So you would come up here in this space and you'd check it out and we would play it. But it's so much different here in a band context. So last Tuesday, was the first time I've heard it in the context of a band where I'm not like, because I'm not very good at bass, it's trying to focus playing, right? And hearing it just cut. And like you've got a track called Ninja, and for me, that was the song. Like it was just like because your bass line's quite busy, and I was like,
that song is in A sharp B flat tuning, you know. So I always tune to fourths, but it's like the lower is like pretty much as low as we go, you know. And it was kind of like that was something that we'd spoken about in terms of like the cabs and the amp like handling like the really really low stuff and it being clear, you know, like being of a fidelity with that stuff. And so it's really low and really busy, you know, that riff. And it just kind of sounded great, you know. That was, you know.
Well, mate, I think that for me was the sort of example, and again, it harks back to me going. I had 3 artists in mind for testing this amp, and that's another reason why you are one of them, because it was like, well, you play in the lowest tuning of people that we have on the bass roster, and you play the busiest stuff. Do you know what I mean? Like in that sort of band rock dynamic, obviously.
Are you saying I overplay, Fenn? Is that what's happening?
That's what I'm trying to say. Like, just roll it back, get a 4-string, get a passive bass. Like, come on. No, don't change what you're doing, man. And then, but then again, so like, then at Download on Sunday, you walk on stage and it's this, like, for me, just because I set your amps up on Sunday. And I was like making sure the head, because it's the first time, make sure the head's nicely in the middle of the 8x10 and stuff. And then, so for anybody who does that, you've got the badge in the middle of the back of the head, the Digbeth badge. And as long as that's perfectly in line with the middle of the back of the handle, you know the amp is nice and square on the back of the cabinet. There you go. Digbeth. Yeah, boy. And so then actually being on stage, when you guys walked out, it was like, oh my God, here, because I could hear the cabs on stage. And just
the choice as well to use ceramic speakers as well. It's like such a nice it's a nice touch. I mean, the neodymiums are great, right?
Yeah,
They
but I think they work for what they work for, and I think having a neodymium works if you've got some small little rig that you're going places. But actually, well, we put wheels, like you've got the 4x10 there. This is the 8x10 here, and well, actually, you're wheeling it everywhere, and if you're lifting it, it's a 2-man lift really anyway.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't we put ceramics in? So we're very fortunate in the fact that we also own a company called HH Electronics who do PA systems, etc. And the guy who does that is also in charge of making and designing speakers. And we came up with a new speaker that was designed for this head for these cabinets. So everything inside is the HH Black series, apart from the square DBC 410 cabinet. But that's to hit a price point. But the all the others, so all the vertical cabs, so the 810, the 410, the 212, they've all got the HH Black series speakers in, which sounds cool anyway. But they were designed for this head and these heads and these pedals. So again, making sure that the speakers and the cabinet can handle like A level down tuning and stuff like that was integral, because at the end of the day, like if it could look as beautiful as it does, but if you plug it in and you start playing riffs on a 5-string bass that's detuned, and all the cab starts doing is flapping, well, you're going to go, well, thanks, but I just can't use it, man.
Yeah, and the initial thing of like coming in and I remember because the first time I played on the big cab was after you came down to show me the 212, and
Right, yeah.
I was with Simon. And after we played it, I mean, I was like, sounds really, really good. I was like, so this sounds ridiculous, but can we lift it? Can we just lift it up together? Because I wanted to, I just was like practical. I wanted to see, and it was like, as you said, it's like a 2-man lift anyway, the big boy. So, and the design as well, like thinking about it, like previous 8x10s that I've had, where it's got the 2 handles, and you're like dragging it that way, and it's just like, why? Have one handle, have the handle in the middle, and you can turn around and wheel it, and it's practical. It's just so much thought has gone into it.
Yeah. Oh man, I think. Well, then there are these little guys, so the pedals as well, and this little dude, which is like your home from home. I've got a Digbeth on my board wherever I go, because even though the Digbeth head, you can fly all to any country in the world and plug it directly in the mains, and the head's going to understand what power it needs to soak. Well, actually, if you've got this on your board, well, you've got the amp on your board. Like it's not exactly the same, but it's very, very close. And that for me is what we were looking for so long. And it's like, well, put an amp in a pedal essentially, and you can have the option there as well of you can still do that blending of the channels, because you can choose between whether you want it to be the mix or the tube / FET, and that's what you're bringing in and out on that pedal, or you can choose a bypass or a mute, and again, like design, like aesthetics wise, it's just right, isn't it? So and again, and the pedals as well, like so happy with that octave / fifth and a compressor, Blackheath distortion, the 85. Like you were saying earlier on with the name, it's all linked back. So the reason why it's called the Digbeth is because that's where the first Laney factory was that Lyndon used. They used the top floor of the old Bird's custom factory. So then the compressor is called the custom factory. The 85 is the interval, because that's the number bus that Lyndon used to get from his mum and dad's house to get to Digbeth. And then the Blackheath, because Blackheath is a place that's just up the road from here, from this factory as we are now. So it's like taking new things, old things, and just blending them together so that it all works. And I think it really comes across with all this stuff.
And I had a bit of a play with those as well. I've got all of those bits and pieces that you mentioned. I mean, and I remember thinking the compressor is actually very musical sounding compressor in terms of like application. I mean, some people would kind of bring it in and out for certain things, but I kind of like a little bit of compression on the way in, you know, straight out of my bass, just bring it in just a little bit. And it's really like a musical sounding compressor. And, you know, and part of my thing is like, I've always played with octavers, and I played with pretty much every one of them on the market at a different point, like trying it. And that one sounds great because it's similar to the, am I right in saying it's kind of like the circuit that was in the SLS?
Yeah, very, very similar. Very similar. But again, we've changed it, and
well, there's more control now, isn't there? There's more control over the separate components of what you're doing.
Yeah, I think as well, because there are options again, like it's because we stopped doing the Nexus SLS and SLs and stuff like that. Well, we had to do them to get to the Digbeth, and we had to do them to get to these pedals because, you know, the SLS had some octave and fifth options on it. It had a
delay thing
and the chorus thing as well. But it's like, well, you just wouldn't use an in-amp effect for that on a bass, really. You would use it as an external thing. So, well, why don't we make the external thing the best thing that is possibly going to be available? And instead of it just being one knob, you've got the options of different switches in the middle. So, like on the compressor, you can choose how fast the rate of compression you want it to be and stuff. So, like, I think, like you said there, musical compression, like, personally, I'm not a person who uses a lot of compression. But when you hear it in the right context, you just couldn't imagine it not being used. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, especially like for definition of like the low stuff, like rolling through it. Sometimes it tightens it up. For me, you know, it is just a lot more controlled. And for instance, the octave fifth thing, like that's something I use anyway. Like a lot of the time where I'll play a note the same time, it's kind of like playing a fifth on top and the octave below, so it's almost like a bass note and a power chord at the same time. So that thing where you can kind of all the separate components of it, you can adjust the tonality of it, how extreme it is, you know, the mix of it, like it's just really nicely thought out, and the distortion is great. The black sounds really good because you played me some recordings, your like band's practice sessions, and you were like, check this out, and it's like it goes from kind of like quite civilized saturation to just like absolute filth, you know?
Yeah, I think so. For me, so if anybody's watching that wants to hear demos and examples of this, at 4 o'clock today, I'm going to be walking through and explaining all the different pedals and products and the Digbeth head and going through what we're describing here. But I think, the thing I love about that pedal, that distortion pedal, so distortion is very often the first pedal that you will get as a bass player, really, isn't it? Like it's one of the staple ones, and with it you've got octave, like an octave, you've got overdrive in the middle, which is essentially, because again we haven't been daft. We've known that, well, some people are gonna perhaps not have a Digbeth, perhaps not have the cabs, but they might just be interested in the pedal because they got an amp that they like. So, but actually we're aware of that. So actually the middle setting, so the overdrive, is actually what you can get out of the Digbeth head, like on the blend channel, but it's the crunch, that sort of filthy sort of dirt. So think of like classic P bass going into overdriven sort of valve amp, that sort of, and it's just starting to crackle a little.
It's like the saturation, really, isn't it?
Yeah. And then you've got the setting down, which I recognize it as a bit more of like a classic amp. Sort of the valves are about to pop, like it wants to go. You know when you're using an old valve amp or a valve bass amp, and you know that, well, enjoy this moment because them valves are going to need changing after this gig.
It's the moment in the studio that you're praying lasts, you know, like
yeah.
the take is that moment. Exactly.
So like trying to sort of capture that sort of sound and taking old bass amps and new bass amps and valve heads and getting the best of all. And then on the top setting, so like the position 1, I guess it would be 1, 2, 3, 2 being in the middle, is more of like a fuzz. So once you start cracking that up, it's more like a fuzz pedal. So think like that that classic Muse sort of bass tone, that sort of thing.
Square wavy kind of,
yeah,
throaty, like square wavy kind of sounding.
Yeah, so quite harsh, but again on the pedal you've got a range knob, and that's sort of like a high passy sort of filter, so you can sort of bring the sort of thump in despite it being fuzzy, and it's essentially what the head does, but when you're blending the two channels. But
so I was going to say that's another thing that I would probably not really mess with. I think I always want to have like a really kind of consistent low end, but then I have, as I said, I want a bit of saturation, a bit of crunch in the bass sound, like the records that I grew up listening to, and it just kind of like it just kind of like has that sounds like there, like instantly. It doesn't take a lot of fiddling, and because you can blend the two of them, they're two like independent circuits that you know you're listening to. It just it really
it's
works.
essentially like two master volumes sort of thing, and you're sort of tweaking them.
And in the context of like playing with guitars, I did do it while we were playing. Like I had it set, and then the guitars came in, and I thought about it, and I thought maybe I've gone a bit too far, like into that territory. And I sort of brought it back, and then we played some more and thought, actually, I could get away with a bit more, you know, and sort of got it to that point, and just like finding a sweet spot with it.
Well, yeah, I think that's it as well. Like, there's enough range on all these new products that you can really dial in a sweet spot pretty quickly, and that for me was, and for us, was the biggest sort of thing with this range, really, to be able to plug it in and you get a good sound straight away.
It's like an intuitive kind of thing, you know. So I absolutely love the Nexus, the original Nexus, the tube Fenn, you know. I've got it in there in my studio, you know. I've still got it set up, like, and it's incredible. But it's like a beautiful mind. When you look at it, you need like a PhD, like you're looking at every single control. There's like so much to control, and it's great, but it takes a while, you know. And then with the SL and the SLS, it was simpler in some respects, but then, as I said, you didn't have like the real saturated, like the guts, you know, that you might want as a rock player, like with the rock kind of stuff. And the application is, if you're playing more traditional styles of R&B, rhythm and blues, you know, like blues and stuff that you want, classic rock that you might want some kind of saturation, even funk, like having a bit of saturation in the sound. And it's so kind of like easy, like it's intuitive to like dial it in.
Yeah, definitely, man. I think beard game is strong. Thank you, Sally. Was that the Vulcan thing? I think so, mate. I think for you, so what are the next sort of steps? What are the next plans for you? So there's a tour coming up at the end of the year, right?
Fingers crossed. Positive thinking and all of that stuff. Like, we're waiting. I mean, obviously they've got to look at the data from download and all that kind of business. But we've got a tour September, October. It's kind of a funny one where originally we booked it as a tour at the end of a cycle. And typically we would play as many at the end of a cycle. Domestically, we would kind of go, let's play as many shows as we can. And to make it work for people, like regional shows, we do them over like weekends. So it's like people would be more available to go to those shows. Now because it's been postponed and the way it's gone, it's like big. Well, I mean, we're not going to might be promoting a single. I don't know. Yeah, they'll get onto that. But you know, we've got this tour which is playing like academies and the Roundhouse and stuff, but it's like over weekends. It's really funny. Funny one for us, but it'll be good. still potentially maybe recording a live album at the Roundhouse. I hope, as far as I know,
Nice.
doing that. So yeah, you'll be seeing a lot of that in it. Looking at doing a new record, looking at producers. We've got loads of songs. We've got the most songs since like Roots Rock Riot.
Really?
Which is 15 years ago essentially. We've got that amount of songs, so it's kind of like I'm really confident that this is going to be the best Skindred record in a long time. Like,
Yeah.
So we've got all that going on. So yeah, just timeline, just waiting. Like
Yeah, but everybody's waiting, aren't they, as well?
Yeah.
And it's like, oh God, what are they going to do next? Like, what's the next thing? So, but I think there seems to be more light on the horizon than there ever has been, despite it being the longest day yesterday. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah, right, Dan. Thank you so much for doing this, mate. Thank you for being just one of the best humans I've ever met, like just ever. It was download last weekend. It's a moment I shall never forget, and it's a piece of history as well. So you made history, baby.
You were there, mate. You were there with me.
Yeah, boy. Right. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Thank you for all the comments, and if you want to check out what these bits sound like, 4:00 today, so in 1 hour and 18 minutes, you'll be able to check out what these things actually sound like. And we're doing it properly. It's not just camera audio, so you'll be able to actually hear what things sound like. But for now, Dan, thank you so much, man. And I'll speak to you very, very soon. And again, big love for the Digbeth, man.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Really.
Oh, there he goes. There we go. Thanks, everybody, for watching. My name's been Fenn. Like I said, catch me in an hour and a bit I'm going to take you through that. And that'll be it. Right. Thank you. Take care. See ya.